I sit there and say, that's really interesting. Did you realise that what you're really describing is the symptoms of introversion? And we talk about that for a little while. And essentially at that point they go, oh wow, that's amazing. And from that moment forward, that to them sometimes is that light bulb moment. Just understanding that they are not the only one makes them feel really different about themselves. And just unveiling that is really cool.
Welcome to the Holistic Health Matters podcast, where it's all about maximizing your health potential in body, mind, and spirit so that you can pursue the abundant life more effectively. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, naturopathic doctor and biblical health coach, and this is episode number 25. Today we're talking with Jon Baker. Jon is joining us from his apartment across the Atlantic in London, England, and Jon is an expert in introversion. He has some deep insights to share with us. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, he's also got some great tips for us to effectively handle that type of a personality. If you listen to this show regularly, you know that it's my contention that we maximize our health potential by aligning our lives more fully with God's design for spirit, mind, and body. God made each and every one of us unique, and part of embracing His design for our minds is understanding the way our brains and our minds are wired to react to interpersonal relationships. If we don't understand the way we're wired and respond accordingly, that's going to be a source of stress for us. And embracing holistic health is all about stress reduction in many ways. You know, in a way, true holistic health transitions from health and wellness into the arena of personal development. And this is one of those episodes. The way we maximize our health potential in a holistic fashion is to become all the men and women God created us to be. Each of us has an individual bent or a way that we're predisposed to react. Rather than trying to be like someone else, we should become the best version of ourselves that we can be. If you're an introvert, that starts with understanding that you're not alone. You're not the only one. There's lots of people like that. And you have some gifts and abilities that are strengths, and you should exploit those strengths. In order to become all the men and women God created us to be, we should live from our strengths. So let's pick up the interview with Jon. He's got some great insights to share. Jon, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. It's great to be here.
I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to share your expertise with us. So you are an expert in introversion, and I'm curious to know how you got into that. How'd you get started?
That's a really interesting question, because I guess the answer to that is, first of all, I am an introvert, and for many years I would sit there and, shall we say, doubt myself. I probably wasn't performing at things. I wasn't in peak shape, shall we say, because I used to spend a lot of time doubting, as I've discovered, do many other introverts. Mm-hmm. So coming back to your direct question, I had a point in my life where I had the great opportunity to refocus the work that I do, as I'd sold my business and I was creating a new one, and I chose to focus on something that was really meaningful to me. Now, meaningful to me is, I guess, a friend of mine and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, and we talked, and he said, what is it that makes you had a great week? And I just said, if I get 2 light bulb moments where I've helped other people to have light bulb moments in that week, I'm there. So my whole aim is to help other people, and I'm an introvert, and I know that from lots of the research that I've done, many other introverts struggle with the same kind of things as myself. And I'll give you a simple example. Quite often I've been having a discussion with somebody, and they've talked about the fact that they don't like small talk, they don't like gathering groups of people they don't know, they feel a bit down about themselves because of this, and then this goes in a cycle, and it kind of gets a bit worse, so they avoid the groups more, and then of course they feel worse about the groups. And I sit there and say, that's really interesting. Did you realise that what you're really describing is the symptoms of introversion? And we talk about that for a little while. And essentially at that point they go, oh wow, that's amazing. And from that moment forward, that to them sometimes is that light bulb moment. Just understanding that they are not the only one makes them feel really different about themselves.
That's
and
excellent.
Just unveiling that is really cool. And then we can talk about some tactics which might help them as well.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a moment. I want to say that I can totally relate to sharing information with someone and seeing the light bulb come on. Today, I'm an airline pilot. I've been a professional airline pilot for 32 years. But years ago, I was a flight instructor teaching people to fly in little single-engine two-seater Cessnas. And we got paid peanuts back then. It was literally, I could have been on food stamps. But what made that job worth it for me was the light bulb moments when you're teaching something and a student might be struggling for a lesson or two, and then all of a sudden the light bulb comes on and you see this expression on their face and their performance. That for me was so gratifying. And I now know that even though I'm also an introvert, my calling is to be a teacher, because that's what really floats my boat. So I can relate to doing your life's work when you're passionate about something. There's something very health building about that as well.
Yeah.
I'd like to start out by asking you this. What are some of the common myths people hold about introversion?
Yeah, that's again. I find there's probably 4 or 5. So some people think that shy and introversion is the same thing, and absolutely not. Shy is, if you like, depending on how shy you are, a fear or a timidity or a dislike of speaking in groups of people or even being with groups of people. Where introversion, the 2 words I always use are energy and processing, and I'll unpack those in a little while. But the point being, the 2 are completely separate. You can, of course, be a shy introvert. And if you're a shy introvert, then it's going to be much harder for you to interact with other people. It's going to be much harder for you to get some of the things you want, and you've got to work extra hard to do that. But you can also be, and this one messes with people's heads sometimes, you can also be a shy extrovert. And I've got a couple of friends who are shy extroverts.
That seems like an oxymoron, a shy extrovert.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 words, I said, are energy and processing. So energy first, and what I call people energy. And stereotypically, an introvert will gain energy when they're on their own. Think of it like a mobile phone. You plug your mobile phone in and it's left quietly somewhere and it's great and it's recharged. You then take it out. Now, if it's one of the older mobile phones, say 2 or 3 years old, what happens? You make a couple of calls and the battery just seems to drain. You can almost see that little batteryometer draining as you use it. And the energy that introverts have drains in much the same way when they're with groups of people. So typically, if there's a bigger group or a group of people they're less aware of, their energy drain is faster, whereas they recharge on their own. And an extrovert typically is the other way round. But I'll give you a quick little story, which is a true story. So this friend of mine, we caught up, it was last year, it was before COVID. BC, as I now start to think of it. But so we were, those days when we'd go out, and this friend came round and he said, "John, I'd love you to come to this networking event, and we're going to meet up with all these other business owners over dinner, and we're going to sit and we're going to chat." And I'm kind of going cold at the idea of this because I'm just, an evening of small talk, David. Can you, as another introvert, you might kind of get that one. But
I get it.
So I'm sitting there going, I really don't want to. And he's going, yeah, it'd be great. So off we go, and we get to this venue. And here I am with my friend. We're at dinner. And I can feel my energy just leaving me.
Yeah.
But I'm there. I've said I'm going to be there. So what do? I chat to these people because I've said I will. Whereas he's sitting there and you can see him almost growing and glowing amongst all the chat that's going on, and I could feel myself shrinking, and I could just see him kind of taking up more space, and it was almost as if he was physically growing, but he wasn't saying a thing, and he was, he struggled to actually join in any of the conversations, but he enjoyed it.
But he soaked it in.
very strange, but yeah. So yes, you can be a shy extrovert, no matter how odd that sounds.
Well, I can absolutely relate again. As I said, I am an introvert, and I discovered a long time ago that I recharge my batteries when I'm alone. I like to read a book, or maybe just simply meditate, listen to some music. That recharges my batteries. My wife is the complete opposite. She's the person that thrives on the room full of people. So when we have people over, if she has her way, we'll have 40 people over and have a party. And I'll do it, but it drains me. And I do love those people. I love interacting with those people, but I am drained afterwards. And she is absolutely energized. We'll go to bed that night. She'll be lying in bed wide awake, and I'll be asleep in 2 minutes. She'll say, "How can you do that?" Well, I'm drained. I'm tired.
Yeah. And, I used to run, I used to run a number of large groups where once a month, 100 professional speakers, and you can imagine the kind of volume at which they'd speak and the egos and the energy in that room. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. It was great fun. But the day after, I couldn't do a thing. I'd be just completely wiped out just from doing that, and sometimes for 2 days afterwards. So I think one of the big things about introversion is being aware that that's going to happen.
Yeah. So if you recognize that you're an introvert, you're the kind of person that feeds on being alone, not all the time, but from time to time to recharge. I don't like labels, because I think a lot of times these personality tests that we take, Myers-Briggs and others like them, I think a lot of times those tests are measuring our brokenness. But I think what we're talking about here is just simply the way we're wired. This is the way we're made. And we need to work with that and come alongside that and embrace it. So what can an introvert do as far as making practical changes to their everyday lives to become more whole and become the person God created them to be?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, and you raised a really interesting point about labels, and labels to me are incredibly useful as a diagnostic tool. However, I can get flour and margarine and whatever on the table because the containers have got those labels on. I quickly get hold of them. Mm-hmm. But what I now make with that same set of ingredients can be completely different. So a label as a diagnostic tool is incredibly useful. But when somebody says to me, "Oh, I can't do that because I'm an introvert," it's no. And the label does not define who you're going to be.
Yes, absolutely.
That's
right
the
on.
Important thing there.
Right on.
So things that you could do. I have an acronym that I often talk about, and I'll say introverts must stop. So the first thing is, what does stop mean? Stop worrying about it, because very often in life, the more we worry about something, the worse it actually becomes in itself. So the first thing is try to stop worrying about it. And then working through the letters of the word stop. So S, to me, is to focus on your strengths and focus on your introvert strengths. Now, very typically, these are going to be things like being good at detail. And quite often introverts are much better at detail, and they're very good listeners. So introverts tend to be great at listening because they're not trying to jump in with their own extroverted world and talk about everything. So they're great listeners. What can we start to do with that? That can mean that in a conversation, let's say, where there's a few people or even just two, you can be very good at listening to what the other person's saying, summarizing it because you've listened completely with the right level of detail, and asking exactly the right questions because you're focused on the other person.
Yes.
Introverts very often are fantastic facilitators, great at just getting and enabling those conversations to go without having to do all the talking themselves.
Yes.
So focus on your strengths. The next one is T for time. And I think we touched on this one earlier. A number of years ago, I went to a 3-day conference, and it was great. It was full of 250 people that were as loud as anything, and I've got to be honest, I got back and I was exhausted. However, I hadn't really thought it through. So the next day, I went out to visit a new client, and I have to say, I was about as much use mentally as a chocolate fireguard. I was just there. I was just, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
So give yourself time. In that particular case, what I needed to do was to make sure that I was not doing anything involve people for the next day or possibly two. Can't always do that, of course, but try and give yourself some buffer time after events or parties where you know you're going to be tired. And one of the other things we can do is, you mentioned your wife loves to throw big parties. Occasionally, find a place where you can perhaps slip out of the party just for a little while, because it can just help a mini recharge, if you like, so that you're not quite as exhausted by the end of it. So as much as possible, give yourself the gift of time.
That is excellent. I like that advice. And I have done that from time to time, but I always feel guilty. I'm like, oh, everybody's in there having a good time. Here I am on the patio. All right, I got to get back in there. But you're right. Sometimes we need to take care of ourselves and work with who we are.
And I think sometimes that's where the O in the stop comes to as well, which I call orient, which I mean by orient yourself and the other people that are important to you around what you are, around the way you are. So, give you an example. You'll find this one familiar. So, a friend of mine is an introvert, and he has a great job, and he spends his days with lots of people, but he gets home at the end of the day, and because he's been with all these people, he is physically and mentally drained. And he just wants to sit in a corner quietly, maybe do a crossword. I think that was his thing, he told me, and reflect on some of the things that have gone on in the day, just to quietly put it all to bed, as it were, so that the next day he can begin again. His wife normally comes in about 5 minutes afterwards, and she is completely the opposite. As an extrovert, she comes in, she's been with all of these people, and she's bouncing off the ceiling. She's got so much energy. And what does she want to do? She wants to talk about her day as her way of putting it to bed and resolving it.
Yes.
So here we have this clash going on.
Mm-hmm.
And this was causing absolute opposite. This was causing lots of problems until I just sat there with them one day and said, look, what's going on here? And they could start to see how they would orient themselves around each other so they could not have that clash in quite the same way. And so maybe the way to spend that time in your party is to actually tell a couple of people. Maybe even there's another introvert in that party with you, David, that would love the excuse of disappearing outside for a few minutes just to talk, or possibly even not to talk to you, but both stand and enjoy the silence outside.
Yeah. And I think it's important to say right here that neither personality type is wrong.
Absolutely.
They both have their strengths. They both have their weaknesses.
Oh, yeah. And just finally on the STOP acronym is P for position. So if it's a party, if it's a work event, or whatever, it's a team meeting or anything that you're doing, see if you can get a position or get a role. Now, typically in a party, that might be you ask the host if you can do something to help. That might be you're the one that goes around with the wine. That might be you clear the room during the evening. But having a proper role makes it a lot easier. I don't know, I'll be honest and say I don't know why. And I only twigged this one when I was doing a lot of the research interviews that I did about introverts, and those that were most successful as introverts were the ones that said when they're in these big gatherings, the way they get round it is to get themselves a role. If it's a work do, they'll ask the host what they can do. Can they welcome the guests? Can they show the guests what's going on? And also they said they do exactly the same at home events. When there's, get themselves a role. And suddenly it's as if we put on, by putting on this, doing a role, it's as if we put on this cloak of, we momentarily dress as somebody else. And it just seems to really help introverts to get more from the situation.
Here in the US, we would call that putting on a different hat.
Okay, that works for me.
That's it. That's
exactly
the phrase.
The same point, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, though. So instead of focusing on, oh my goodness, look at all these people, I'm getting drained, I know what I'm going to feel like in a couple of hours, you ask the host, hey, can I help park some cars, or can I help serve drinks? And then you've got something else to focus on. and it helps you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Plus taking a few bits of time during the session as well, and it really does help.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. So let me go ahead and go over all these so that the audience can hear it, listeners can hear it again. Now, if I get something wrong, let me know. So the acronym is STOP.
Okay.
The acronym is STOP, and the S. So first thing you want to do is stop worrying. And
big thing, really important.
Right. Individually, S stands for strengths, and introverts have plenty of them. They tend to be more detail-oriented. They're good listeners. And I would add to that, they're probably good problem solvers, too. The kind of person that could go into an organization, listen to each person saying, this is what I run into in the course of a day. These are my challenges. And listen enough and effectively enough to offer real-life solutions to that organization. Would I be right on that?
Yep, absolutely right.
So the T stands for time. So if you're at a big event, if possible, slip away for a few minutes, get away from the crowd and just be alone, or find another introvert and just, breathe some fresh air outdoors for a little while. Having that temporary break could be really empowering.
Mm-hmm.
And then O stands for Orient, and that is spending some time reflecting, spending some time alone, quiet time, whatever it is, journaling or prayer or whatever it is, and that will absolutely recharge your batteries. And then P stands for position, and that is have a role. And if you're in a gathering that you have you can switch hats and put a hat on and say, this is my job, that will definitely help lessen the stress you experience in that large group.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay. As a genuine introvert would do, I listened.
Yay, I see. And it works, doesn't it? You listened in detail, and you summarised beautifully. I like it. Yeah. One other quick one that is quite interesting, because I said earlier that there was two things about what I call the two defining points around introversion. Lots of people come out with all sorts of words, some of which are myths, like introverts are shy. But the two things, one I said was this people energy thing. The other one is processing, or in common language, the way we think. Introverts' thinking method, if you like, is internal processing, and extroverts' external processing. So putting that back into English again, an introvert typically will think to talk. In other words, you ask somebody a question that's an introvert, and they typically they'll bit of silence while they try and think of the best, the most complete, the most detailed answer, and then they'll give the answer. And an extrovert will talk to think. So you ask that question to the extrovert, and woof, you'll get a flood of words coming back to you. And neither is wrong, neither's right. They are just different.
There's a difference between thinking to talk and talking to think. And I found that to be true with myself. A lot of times someone will ask me a question and I'll know the answer, but I'll be exploring in my mind for a moment about what's the best way to go about this? How can I relate this in terms they're going to understand? And they look at me pausing and they think, he doesn't know. And they're moving on to something else. I'm like, no, I actually had something great to share with you, but you were too impatient to listen.
No, absolutely. And no, it is. It's one of the really big things that happens quite a lot, and it creates all sorts of problems in so many settings, particularly, funny enough, in business meetings where somebody asks a question, you don't get answered, and extroverts don't like gaps in the conversation, so it's almost the opposite again. So what do? They fill it for you. So what have they just done? They've trained you that they're not interested in your answer. Yeah. It's not true, but...
Which is not very people-oriented, is it?
Absolutely not. And the extrovert, it's how they think. It's because they're bouncing words out, and the very act for them of talking it through is
that's an excellent
how they're processing it.
Really. And if you know that about yourself, and you can recognize it in other people, that'll enhance your interaction, even in one-on-one situations, correct?
Very much so. Very much so.
I'm thinking right now that there's got to be somebody listening that is an introvert, and they've kind of felt maybe a little down on themselves about the way they are. Maybe they think they're the only one. Could you speak to that a little bit about, not beating yourself up because you're an introvert?
Well, I think the first thing is that introverts are, let's say, different to an extrovert it doesn't make you worse. It doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make you inferior in any way, shape, or form. Recognise some of the strengths. Use the STOP acronym, but also recognise that extroverts also have their own weaknesses, and neither's wrong, neither's right. And I think recognising as well that there are lots of other people who are similar to you. They are also introverted. One of the biggest things I keep finding when I talk to people is they think they're the only one like this. And to be honest, David, I used to think I was the only one. And when you think you're the only person, you start to feel really bad about yourself. When you realise that there's a number of others around, hey, that's a good thing. I think that it's made worse in the world, if you like, because I think in particularly Western culture, it's almost as if public success has got an extrovert definition to it, where bold and loud is assumed to be good, and we hear about the fact that you're supposed to show and openly share emotions all the time. Well, actually, there's no reason why that is the case. It just happens to be the way that success seems to be defined by some people. Leads me to another one of the introvert myths that I think is quite appropriate as we talk about this thing. Myth number 2 for me is introverts don't make good leaders, and I think that's complete rubbish. Again, it's linked to this thing about, oh yeah, great leaders are those that are bold and loud, and no, actually, that's got nothing to do with leadership, apart from perhaps when you have to address your shareholders meeting or something and get asked questions off the cuff. And sure, an introvert, because of their internal processing, won't feel comfortable with that, but they can still do it. But what else is, leadership is about being great with people. Leadership is about allowing your team to take the limelight rather than you,
absolutely.
So that they grow. And introverts are much better at that. And then whether we think that Facebook is a great thing for society or not,
we don't have enough time for that one.
On that one. No, quite. But Mark Zuckerberg has clearly built a great organisation. He's an introvert. Yes. Bill Gates, another introvert. In the UK, I did a survey a couple of years ago, and I just asked 150 people. I said, name a great leader. And 63% of them all said Richard Branson from Virgin. Another introvert. So don't believe that because you're introverted, because you feel like this, that you can't achieve.
Is he really an introvert? I'm surprised to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had him on, this was before the days of private jets, got really big, and we used to have a lot of celebrities flying first class on the airliners. And Richard Branson was on my flight, and we always say goodbye to the passengers. And as he was going by, he stopped and he smiled and he shook my hand and he had a few people with him. And to me, he looked like the classic extrovert.
No, he's not. I've never met him myself, although a friend of mine did used to be his global brand strategy manager, so we did know him quite well.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I had a 10-second interaction with him.
Yeah, but I think, like many people, he's learned to put on the right hat at the right moments. But no, he's an introvert, and I think that's when we come back to realizing that introversion is about energy and the processing. It's not about all these other negative things that we've allowed ourselves to believe. So move away some of the negative thoughts we've had, and actually suddenly we're back in this place where it's not the same as being shy. Great leaders can be extroverts or introverts. And the other myth that I hear is that introverts are antisocial. And this one always makes me smile, because it actually happened to me. A very good friend of mine that I had met, and we used to meet up through a business networking group once every couple of weeks. And in that time, I had, in a 2 or 3 year period, I'd got some business, which is why I was there, and I'd, met a few people. I wouldn't say I'd made many friends. Hey, I'm an introvert, right? But this particular person, we'd got on quite well. And then I stopped going to the group, and 3-4 years later, we met up again. And we're doing what people do, we're reminiscing, talking about the good old days. We had a glass of wine. And then she said to me, John, you do realise that some of the group thought that you were a bit antisocial, don't you? And I'm like, what? And she said, I know that you're not, and I know that you're one of the most people-focused people around. And she would stand up and defend me. And so we talked about this for a while. And the way I look at it is like this. Supposing, whether it's a party, whether it's any kind of event, and you've got a number of people, you know how you have people standing around in little huddles of, I don't know, 3 or 4, or slightly bigger maybe. Now, as an introvert, I might be in the middle of one of those huddles as I start to feel my energy draining. Subconsciously, what do? I can either put into place the time thing and go outside and find some time, but subconsciously I tend to step back, so I'm now standing slightly at the back of the huddle. I'm still joining in, but what I've done, when people say, oh, introverts are a bit standoffish, I just stood off in a literal sense. I didn't leave the huddle, I just stood slightly back.
Yeah.
And then being aware that you're doing that, being aware that it's about energy rather than because you're choosing to believe that you're antisocial or something, I think is really, really important. So stop believing some of the stories that are around, focus on the STOP acronym, and ignore some of the myths that are there. And be aware of yourself, be aware of what you can and can't do.
That's an excellent wrap up. I've been saying for a few years now that I'm an introvert that loves people. And people don't understand that, but it's the truth. I just simply interact with people differently than, the life of the party kind
Absolutely.
of person telling all the jokes. And, I love being around people, but I interact and I fit in that room differently from others, but that doesn't make it wrong.
Yep. That's correct. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Jon, I really appreciate you giving us some time and sharing your wisdom with us. I think you dropped some really good value bombs for the listeners to implement. That's great stuff. So how can the listeners get a hold of you?
Best way to do that is on my website, which is introvertinbusiness, that's all one word, .co.uk. There's a shed load of material that many other introverts have found useful on there, so welcome to read all of that. There's also my phone number's on there, contact details, and I'll share them all with you here now, David, but just in the interest.
Go ahead.
Okay.
If you want to, yeah.
So
sure.
On LinkedIn is somewhere I'm regularly on LinkedIn, so you can look me up there. That's Jon Baker. That's Jon spelt without an H. And my email, Jon, Jon, at Jon, Jon, -baker.me, because it's just me.
That's great. All right, Jon. Well, thanks again for being on the show. Appreciate you being here.
Brilliant to have this conversation. Thank you so much for having me, David.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Jon Baker. He's a wealth of information, and he gave us a lot of value bombs on how to handle introversion, whether it's you that experienced that or that you have a family member or a coworker that is an introvert. There's a lot of great ways to enhance the interaction that you can have with that person or with those people. One of the important points that Jon pointed out is that introverts process things internally and extroverts process things externally. So in other words, an introvert thinks to talk and an extrovert talks to think. So if you ask an introvert a question, he may pause for a moment, or he or she may pause for a moment before they give you their answer because they're thinking about what they want to say. Whereas an extrovert will immediately give you an answer while they process their thoughts out loud. That's an important distinction. Just chew on that for a minute, and I think you'll get something out of this episode. So don't forget to go to my website, davidsandstrom.com. This is episode number 25. I always post a full transcript of each conversation there. You can read it online, or you can download it, put it on your device, take it with you, and read it later. Well, once again, thank you for listening. I appreciate you. If you're enjoying the show, tell your friends about it. I would appreciate you spreading the word. Well, that's it for now. Have a great week. Be blessed, and I'll talk with you next week. Take care.